To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
G'day guys, Disney Dave coming at you once again from Down Under with another very special video for you today. Today I'm presenting what I hope will be the very first in a long line of interview videos with well-known personalities from within the Disney community. And we're kicking it off today with a man who is rapidly cementing himself as one of the most important Disney historians in history. And that is absolutely without a word of a lie. We are speaking to Didier Ghez, who is currently in the process of putting together a 6-volume series of books focusing on unpublished Disney artwork. And when I say unpublished, I mean artwork that has not been looked at by human eyes for, in some cases, close to 70 years. And that is absolute truth. Didier does not only consider himself a writer, but also a bit of a detective who has to piece together clues from all over the place to try and find this artwork that he's not sure even exists anymore, or artwork that people have never heard of before, artwork that people have never ever looked at. Now, Didier published the very first book in his series. It is known as the They Drew As They Please series. This is the very first book, which was published last year, which is the hidden art of Disney's golden age, and it covered the era of the 1930s. Now, Didier's plan for these books is to cover right from the 1930s up until about the beginning of the 2000s, which he will speak about in our interview. This is the very first book here, The Hidden Art of Disney's Golden Age. As I said, they are these beautiful, sturdy, hardcover volumes, which in the end, when you've got 6 of these lined up together, these are probably going to be one of the largest compendiums of Disney art books ever published, as far as I'm aware anyway. Now, as I said, that's the first volume. Didier is releasing his second volume. This is going to be the cover right here, and it's called The Hidden Art of Disney's Musical Years, and it is the first book to cover the era of the 1940s. Volume 3 in the series will also cover the 1940s as well, but this is the very first, this is the first 1940s issue, and it's covering that era of the Disney studio, which is probably most well known for producing a series of World War II propaganda films. But what most people probably don't realise is that the studio were still actively producing shorts and producing artwork and concept design for shorts and for feature films while they were making these World War II propaganda films, sort of setting themselves up for the future, for when the war was over. So they had some projects to head straight into once the war was over. Now this book, The Hidden Art of Disney's Musical Years, will be released on August 30th, 2016, which is rapidly approaching at the time of this filming. I have seen the book and I can say it is absolutely stunning. Didier was kind enough to send me a transcript, a manuscript of the book, and the artwork in this is absolutely incredible, but I will get to that in the interview as well. You can currently pre-order this, or depending on when you're watching it, you can order this on Amazon. Amazon UK, depending where you are in the world. If you are international like myself in Australia, Book Depository is also selling it, and that's probably a slightly cheaper option for people who might live outside of the US or the UK. Now, because of course I'm in Australia and Didier is over in the United States, we've had to Skype this call, but it was a lot of fun. It's quite a long interview, but if you are interested in this kind of thing, please sit through it all, because the stuff that Didier is about to talk about is absolutely fascinating and will definitely put a smile on your face, and you might learn a thing or two just as I did. So please, let me introduce to you Didier Ghez.
Hey David.
Hi Didier, how are you?
Great, great. It's a pleasure to meet you finally.
You too. Thank you for taking the call and taking a bit of time out of your busy morning to sit and have a quick chat.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. It's what, about 9 a.m. over there?
It is. What time is it on your end?
11 p.m.
Oh wow. Okay, this is pretty fun. This is the first time I do this. So
yeah, this is the first time I've done an interview over Skype myself. So yeah, it's all a bit new and a bit fun. My brief introduction. I basically mentioned that your series of books, of course They Drew As They Please. There's the first volume there. Oh, there's the second one right there.
This is the second one here, yes.
The Art of of Disney's musical years, and I've of course seen it. You very kindly let me have a look at a transcript of it, and I have to say it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, some of the stuff that you found for this volume is absolutely gorgeous.
Well, thank you very much.
This series of books, as I said in the introduction, as far as I'm aware, by the time you've finished compiling the volumes, there's going to be 6 volumes of them?
Yep, that's right.
By the time you finish compiling these, as far as I'm aware, this is probably going to be one of the largest sort of compendiums, volumes of Disney art, unpublished art, ever published. I've got quite a collection of Disney art there, art books and behind-the-scenes books and stuff, and I've never seen anything, I suppose, as ambitious as this project that you've undertaken. I think it's really, really fantastic.
Well, thank you. I mean, this has been really a dream of a lifetime. I've spent the last, as you know, the last 25, 30 years studying Disney. And as you can see behind me, there are quite a few books about Disney.
Yep.
In fact, I think I own every single book ever released on Disney and,
Wow.
and its art and its his career. And the reality is, I realized year after year that what really fascinated me was the creative process. And within the creative process, what fascinated me even more was the part of the creative process that came very, very, very early, when some of the artists really explored what the movies could be in many, many, many different ways without too many limitations. And I thought that was fascinating because the ideas that they put on paper were extremely different with what actually ended up on the screen. The other thing is, when you were able to dig into that, you also realized that you had almost as many projects that ended up on the screen as projects that in the end were not completed. And those projects that were not completed, that didn't end up on the screen, were sometimes even more fascinating than the ones that ended up on the screen. And so I really wanted to dig into both subjects and to really start to understand in a lot more details that creative process and what it was about and how it came to be and the different steps in it. And I loved a lot of the books that have been released on Disney over the years, but sometimes I was a little bit frustrated by the fact that I tended to see the same illustrations come back and back again in those books, and with some rare exceptions, you would tend to see exactly the same thing over and over and over again. Not completely true, of course. I mean, take John Canemaker or J.B. Kaufman and a few others. They really tried to find a lot of new material, but some of the others, and for reasons that I now understand a lot better, having gone through all of this process, and I won't go into too much detail on this, but now I understand why that is the case. But I wasn't satisfied with that, and I really wanted to. I knew there were millions of pieces of artwork stored within the Animation Research Library, the archives at Disney that take care of animation, and I really wanted to see a lot more of those 65 million pieces of artwork. And I also knew that there were pieces of artwork in private collections that had very seldom been seen and sometimes never been seen. And I wanted to see them almost selfishly. I want to see them for myself. And then I thought, well, if I'm interested in that, maybe others will be. So that's part of the rationale. And then the last part of the rationale is, throughout the years, the more I studied Disney, the more I realized that one of the things that really, really interested me were the artists who worked for Disney. They were fascinating in themselves. They were so much part of what Disney was, and we knew often so little about them, except again through books by Canemaker and Michael Barrier and J.B. Kaufman, but we didn't know that much about them. And I wanted to know a lot more about them and start really dealing with Disney history as a lot of art critics deal with art history. I wanted to start having monographs on those different artists and really treat them as who they were, which is tremendous artists in their own right. And so that was, I knew that wasn't possible in just one book. And that's why I suggested to Chronicle Books a few years back to do a series. At the time, it was a series of 5 books about.
There's just so much out there, I could imagine.
Exactly, and so that's the genesis of the project. That's the idea.
Wow. Well, you did touch on the books aren't just about the artwork; they're about the creators and the artists behind it. And you did say, I mean, the stuff that you've found, it has blown my mind as well. I mean, I've seen exactly what you said. You look through these books and you see the same stuff over again. You see books that say unpublished artwork, and you've seen it before. But I have to say, throughout the 200 and something pages of these books, not one piece have I ever seen. And it's a credit to you for being able to persist and find some of this amazing stuff. And even me sitting here, looking at the transcript that you sent, I've been looking through it for 20, 25 minutes or so until it hit me that I'm looking at stuff that I'm probably one of the very first handful of people to ever see this, and this is just a feeling is just like, wow, I'm really looking at something really, really special here.
And so you're right in a lot of ways. You are the first person, or one of the first people to see this artwork, sometimes in more than 70 years. And so that was actually that's one of the elements that's really fun. So about 90% of the artwork in those books has never been seen before in book form. But the best part is there's a lot of not just research but detective work that goes into the making of those books. And so one of the first things that I do, of course, as a historian, is what any good historian needs to do, which is understand everything that has been written about a specific subject, look at every single source released until now, and really understand what the body of work is on that subject or that artist. But then obviously that's just the first step. The next step is to dig a lot further. And so what I tend to do is something that John Canemaker did also for some of his books, which is to go and try and track down the family of the artists. And so if you take volume 2, for example, the one that's just about to be released, the hidden art of Disney's musical years. Well, if you take that volume, you have 2 artists who are female artists who worked in the story department in the late 1930s and 1940s. And those are Sylvia Holland and Retta Scott. And I'm just going to take those 2 artists as my example here in terms of the research. So when I started looking into the art of Retta Scott, what we knew about Retta Scott, what everybody knew about Retta Scott who had read a little bit about Disney, was that she was the first female animator at Disney. She had worked on Bambi and animated especially one scene with the dogs and so on and so forth. And so we knew that. And then when I dug a little bit deeper, I realized that she was also, and mostly, in fact, a great story artist at the studio. And so that gave her a place in the book series. So I knew I wanted to feature her. So I contacted the family of Retta Scott, and she had 2 sons. And I contacted the 2 sons, and one of them said, well, I don't have much. I just have a little bit of material. The other one said, I have absolutely nothing. Well, the one who said, I have a little bit of material, I said, so, okay, what do you have? And he says, well, I have very, very little. I have a few story notes. I have a few autobiographical notes by my mother. And so he sent me those autobiographical notes, and I'm showing you a transcript of some of them here. And but as you can see, it was very slim. They were just a few pages, and so not much. But I said, yeah, absolutely, send that along. And so I started reading those, and they were absolutely fascinating. I mean, it's the first time, of course, I could hear Retta Scott talk in her own voice. And so that was great. But then when I read the notes carefully, what I realized is she left the studio in 1946. She left the Disney studio in 1946. And then for 30 years, she was out of animation completely. But what's really, really interesting is that then in the 1980s, she came back to animation, not for Disney, but for some small studios in Hollywood. And so I was like, okay, this is really interesting, because if she did, then there are still people around. There must be people around who knew her at that time, who worked with her. So I contacted those people, and I started interviewing them. And they were great artists whom I interviewed about Retta Scott. And they said, Didier, one of them told me, Didier, there's something really interesting. There's something you should maybe pursue if you can. One day, Retta came to the studio and she showed us the mock-up of a book that she had created in 1941 with Disney legend Wally Reitherman. And so I'm like, this is really interesting. First time I hear about that. This is great. Well, so about 10 minutes later, I sent an email to Retta's son and I say, have you ever heard about that book? Have you ever seen that mock-up of a book? And he says, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, I have it here. I'm like, what? So I'm like, okay, so if he has that, which is already great in itself, what else does he have? And so I start diplomatically, I start asking him over several weeks what else he has. And then at some point he says, oh, now that I think about it, I might actually have a few drawings from Bambi, but I didn't really think that was relevant. I'm like, yeah, it is relevant. I mean, it really is relevant. I mean, it's the first project your mother worked on when she was at the studio. That's how she was discovered. So yeah, absolutely, it's relevant. Please dig those up. So he says, oh, okay, I'll try. And so after a few weeks of following up again, he comes back and he says, I went to the attic where those drawings, I thought those drawings were, and yeah, I did find them, and I actually found a little bit more. Well, the little bit more ended up being 150 original drawings from I don't know how many projects, including some marvelous stuff from the early days of Wind in the Willows, what became the Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Abandoned projects, one of them called On the Trail, which is a beautiful, beautiful project. And his mother has preserved exactly half of the storyboards for that project. The other half is at the Animation Research Library, but he had the missing half. Then he sent me some drawings that I really could not recognize for the life of me. That was something I had never seen before. Some of my friends said, from some of the buildings, this is probably taking place in New Orleans, but we have no idea what that is. And then Hans Perk, who's a really good friend and a wonderful historian, said, based on my research, and I have no idea how he did that. I mean, he's a complete magician from that standpoint. He said, based on my research, this might be based on a story from 1894 called Toinette's Philip. I'm like, how you found that? I'm not going to even ask, but this is amazing. And I started looking at my papers and the notes I had from Abandoned Project at the studio and so on and so forth. And true enough, there was an incredibly confidential project from 1946 called Toinette's Philip that the studio was working on at the time. And so I emailed the Animation Research Library. I said, have you ever heard of that project? They said, no. I said, do you have anything about that project? They said, we're going to look. And about an hour later, the person with whom I work at the Animation Research Library sent me an email back. She said, yep, actually we do. We have 10 drawings from that project and they match exactly the style of what you sent us. And you basically have one half and we have the other half. And so that was another project we discovered a lot of stuff about. And obviously, there were also those incredibly powerful drawings from Bambi that just show exactly why Walt Disney and Dave Hand recognized Retta Scott's talent. And that's why they asked her to animate that scene in Bambi, because those drawings were just, and you know that because you saw them in the book now, they're absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And there was more and more and more, and it kept coming. So that was Retta Scott. And then Sylvia Holland, there's basically a very similar story, which is I knew she had a daughter, and I knew that daughter had been contacted in the past by John Canemaker and Robin Allen. And so I knew she had a few things at her place. And so I contacted the daughter, who by the time I contacted her was in her 90s. And she said, yeah, absolutely, I have a few things and so on. And I'm happy for you to come and meet me when I'm around. But because I'm now a bit old, I would love for my daughter to also be there. So I had the daughter of Sylvia Holland and the granddaughter of Sylvia Holland at the place. So I went there with a really, really good friend of mine who has been incredibly helpful with the whole process of research. And that friend is Joe Campana, who's really one of the godfathers of the project. And so we went to the place of Sylvia Holland's daughter, and she greeted us, and she said, well, I've prepared quite a few things for you to look at. And so there was a full closet full of artwork and documents and so on and so forth. And my first reaction of was when I realized that in that closet there was a whole section of boxes that were letters, correspondence. And for a historian, correspondence is a time machine. It really is a time machine. It's the best way to have access to what was really happening at the time without all of the embellishments of interviews that happened years later and things like that. So that was, and all of the letters were perfectly organized in chronological order and so on. So I knew that was already a treasure trove. So that in itself would have made my day. Well, then there was a big box of artwork which I started to look into, and I found more and more incredible visual material, and so that was great. But that being said, having looked at everything that the daughter had prepared for me, I realized that there were a few things that John Canemaker and Robin Allen had seen in the past that I wasn't seeing there. And so I said, do you have any idea where those photos are? Or do you have any idea where those pieces of artwork are? And she said, no, I really don't know. And by that point, her daughter arrived. And so I said, your mother showed me so many wonderful things. And Joe Campana was in the background starting to scan all of that. And I said, but the issue is I haven't found this and this element that I know your mother has. And so the daughter says, you know what, come with me, let's go through the house, let's try and find more things. I said, well, that's great, because obviously I couldn't have done that by myself. I would not dare do that. So says, have you looked here? I said, yeah. Have you looked here? I say, yeah, looked at that. She says, have you looked at this big box here, this big trunk? I said, no, because there's stuff above it, and I wouldn't dare open it without authorization. She says, let's go and look at that trunk. And so we opened the trunk, and it was full from top to bottom, like this huge, absolutely massive, full of artwork and documents and written documents and more written documents and story meeting notes and documents that are nowhere to be found at the archives, and documents that just shed so much light on what was going on at the studio in the late 30s and 40s until 1946. And that was just mind-blowing. And I'm like, this is incredible, this is insane, like literally like those discoveries in Tutankhamun's tomb or something, like opening those. And so that was great. So I went to the terrace where Joe was with Sylvia Holland's daughter, and he was scanning more documents and chatting with Sylvia Holland's daughter. And I said, Joe, you won't believe what I just found. He said, well, wait till you go back, because while I was chatting, Sylvia's daughter told me that there is potentially more in this big box here on the terrace. And so I opened the box and I started looking, and I just could not believe my eyes. And at some point, I take out an envelope and I read what's written on the envelope. And I said, Joe, if this is what I think it is, this is just going to be insane. And so I take out those drawings, and they were like 15 drawings, original drawings by Kai Nielsen for Swan of Tuonela. Sorry, by Sylvia Holland for Swan of Tuonela. No, by Kai Nielsen. Sorry, I was right. 15 drawings by Kai Nielsen for Swan of Tuonela that had never, ever been seen before, and that were probably in that big box since about 60 or 70 years ago. And there were some Mary Blair, and there were some hundreds of drawings by Sylvia Holland. And one was more beautiful than the other, and it was just insane. It was just, and it wouldn't stop. It took Joe, who's based in Los Angeles, and again, who helps me more than I can tell on those projects. It took him 6 months to scan all of the material. 6 months. The richness of that collection is just out of this world. And so that happened, and that wasn't the first time that happened in the course of the research for that book series. I mean, one of the things that I found when I was researching the first book, one of the first major discoveries, and I'll tell you in a few minutes here. But so when I started researching the first book, I wanted to find things that no one had found before. And so the first thing I did again was to access everything that had been written on the different subjects, on the different artists that I was researching. Well, one of the great things that John Canemaker did when he wrote his seminal books, Before the Animation Begins and Paper Dreams, is that after he wrote those books, he donated all of his archives to New York University, to NYU. And those archives are an absolute treasure trove for historians. So I sent a volunteer called Joseph Smith in New York to check out those documents at NYU, and he sent me scans of all of the relevant documents. Well, all of those relevant documents included lots of interviews that John Canemaker had conducted when he researched the chapters on the different artists that he covered in Before the Animation Begins. And one of those artists, of course, was Ferdinand Horvath. Well, when I read the interview with Horvath, at some point in one of the interviews, I had a complete shock as I stopped reading, and I was like, no, I can't believe what I'm reading here. And so what the person interviewed was saying was Ferdinand Horvath wrote a diary during his whole life, and that was sold to a Los Angeles book dealer when his widow passed away. I'm like, what? There was a diary? I mean, again, diary, correspondence, those are time machines. I needed to find it if I could. But don't forget that that interview that John Canemaker was conducting was conducted more than 20 years ago. So I'm like, okay, well, there is no chance that I'm going to find those. I mean, the trail must be cold by now. There's absolutely no chance. But then again, I wouldn't be me if I didn't try. So I talked to Joe Campana, who's an incredible detective and who can find everyone you can think of. And I said, Joe, I just have the name of that book dealer in Los Angeles. Is there any way we could try and track him down? If he's still around, if his store is still around, if he's still around. So a few days later, Joe comes back to me and he says, you know, the store closed many years ago, but I actually found his personal contact details, including a phone number. I'm like, okay, this is great. So I call and the number is still valid. So I leave a message on the answering machine. I say, well, we'll see. It's a long shot, but maybe it will work. And then about a week later, I haven't heard anything back. And so I'm like, okay, well, that was probably a cold trail and that's not going to lead to anything. And by that point, I'm on a business trip in Mexico, and I'm between two meetings during that trip. And I get a phone call from a number that I don't recognize. And so I pick up the phone. I'm like, yes, hi, this is Didier Ghez. And the person on the other line, on the line says, well, I'm the son of the dealer that you tried to contact last week. I'm like, hello? Yes. Thank you very much for returning my call. Is your father still with us? He says, yeah, as a matter of fact, he's with me right now. I'm like, right, this is great. I'm like, would you by any chance still happen to have the documents? And he says, yes, we do, and we're interested in selling them. I'm like, this is incredible. And he says, oh, and by the way, on top of the diaries that you mentioned, there is quite a lot of correspondence between Ferdinand Horvath and his wife from 1933, and a lot of it deals with his career at the studio. Clearly, we can't really read it because it's in Hungarian, but there are quite a few keywords in the correspondence that make us think for a fact that he's talking about his career at Disney. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk. And so I bought all of those documents, and so I brought for you one of the diaries, and so those are the diaries. And I'm gonna actually try and show you. So this is the box of diaries. It's literally his whole life in diaries. And but there was a small catch though. There's a small catch. So I bought the diaries, but the catch was. Ferdinand Horvath was Hungarian, and so he uh, he wrote to his wife in Hungarian, and so all of the correspondence was in Hungarian, and all of the diaries, for some reason, were in German. At least the first half of the diaries, and then he switched to English during the later part of his life. And so I got Hans Perk, my good friend from Denmark, who speaks very good German, to translate the most interesting parts of the diaries. And I got two friends from Hungary to translate the whole correspondence. And that's how the whole chapter on Ferdinand Horvath is built. And that means that it's a very, very, very different chapter from what John Canemaker had in his book. And I want to think that the two chapters just complement each other. And there's things in the John Canemaker's chapter that aren't mentioned in my book, and the reverse is true. And so that's one of the detective stories for volume one. And I'm working now on volume 3 and volume 4, and there are lots and lots of more stories that I'll be able to tell you next time we talk about the future volumes.
That's incredible. I'd love to. It sounds like you're compiling the volumes as you go along. You're finding so much stuff that you'd have to be, oh, that's for the next volume, that's for the next volume, sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it never stops. I mean, it's really funny because I was a few months ago, back in May, I was checking the collection of the family of Ken Anderson, who's going to be featured in volume 5 in the series. And so we went there with a really good friend called Lucas Sistrom, who's becoming an incredible Disney historian, and we'll hear a lot more about him in the next few years. I'm absolutely certain he's the new John Canemaker. He's very young, but he's now really taking the relay when it comes to Disney history. And so we went there with Lucas Sistrom to the house of the daughters of Ken Anderson, and we checked out their collection, which is tremendous. And one of the first things we found was a whole envelope full of probably 150 pieces of art from Sleeping Beauty, from early designs for Sleeping Beauty. But when I looked at the artwork, I'm like, okay, this is actually not by Ken Anderson. About 70% of this is by a completely different artist called Tom Oreb. And Tom Oreb happens to be one of the focuses of Volume 4. So while researching Volume 5, I was actually finding lots of treasures for Volume 4. And so it's really, really funny because more often than not, you go looking for something, and sometimes you find that thing, but sometimes you end up finding something that's completely different from what you were looking for at first, but that helps one of the other parts of the research. And so I love that.
Wow. So apart from contacting families and contacting people who the artist knew, you've had access to the Disney Archives and the Animation Research Library as well?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, that's a big part of the process also, it's to spend a lot of time at the archives and to spend a lot of time at the Animation Research Library and to dig deep into their collections. So at the Animation Research Library, the really easy part is when the artwork is already digitized. So they have a fairly big database of artwork, which contains maybe 1% of what they really have in their whole collection. And that's the 1% that's already digitized. And the good thing is, among that 1%, there's a lot of pre-production artwork. So that's the beauty of it. But that being said, if you want to find the stuff that has never been seen before, you usually have to go to the boxes themselves, the actual artwork. And some of them have not been opened since, like Charles Solomon was researching his book, the Disney That Never Was. And some have not been opened for maybe longer than that. And so you never know exactly what you're going to find or not find. Sometimes you're hoping that there is going to be a lot on one subject, and unfortunately there isn't. And sometimes you're looking for something, and again, you find something completely different. That happened to me recently. I was looking for some artwork from I think Campbell Grant or another artist who is going to be featured in Volume 3, and I asked for a file that I thought was there, and Jackie Vasquez at the Animation Research Library, who works with me on those projects, she said, well, I could not find that file, but I brought the box just for you to know what's in the box and to really show you that the file isn't there, that unfortunately it's not there. But you know what, when I looked at the box to find that file, I found something that I think you're going to be interested in. Yeah. And so she found the full file of documents by James Podrero, which were the other half of something that we had found by sheer luck just 2 weeks earlier. And so that was just incredible. That was just marvelous. I mean, to give you the full story, I'll give you the full story on that one because it's actually a very fun story for Volume 3. I was working on that chapter about James Podrero, and I knew he had worked in the 1940s on an abandoned Goofy short where Goofy was wearing a zoot suit, one of those really weird suits from the mid-40s. And so I'm like, this is really interesting. I've never heard anything about that project, never seen anything about that project. I would really, really want to find the artwork for that project. Well, for the life of me, for more than a year, I really could not find anything anywhere. No documentation, no artwork, nothing. And I was really giving up. And at some point, I was reading a book that was just released a few months ago called How to Be a Disney Historian by Jim Korkis, which is a very nice little textbook which has some very wonderful essays by a lot of Disney historians. And I read that, and Jim was telling us how he had been inspired by the Christopher Finch book, The Art of Walt Disney. Like many of us. And so I'm like, this is interesting. Christopher Finch. Yeah, of course, I've looked at The Art of Walt Disney many times, but there's one book I haven't looked at that often. It's Walt Disney's America by Christopher Finch. So I go there and I check that out just to remind myself of what's in that book. And while I go through that book, I find a small drawing of Goofy dancing, which is like, oh my God, what is this? This could actually be Goofy in a zoot suit. This is really interesting. What is this from? What project is that from? Why is that in the book? So immediately I contact Jackie Vasquez again at the Animation Research Library. I said, have you ever heard of that project? And blah blah. She said, no, I have no idea. I said, if I send you a photograph of the piece of artwork, can you tell me if you have ever seen that? And so I sent her a photograph of that piece of artwork. And she says, oh my God, Didier, you're so lucky. I'm like, why? She said, I looked at that piece of artwork for the first time 2 weeks ago, and there is a lot more. And she said, the reason why I looked at that piece of artwork 2 weeks ago is because the person who's compiling the Taschen book on Disney art was just looking at that artwork with me 2 weeks ago. And it's the first time that artwork has been seen in I don't know how many dozens of years. And so she said, but I just looked at that artwork. So she says, there is a lot more, and I'm going to send you photographs of it. And so we found lots of artwork from James Podrero for that abandoned short, which is called How to Get Hep. And so with Goofy and telling us how to dance and how to dance the new dances from the 40s and so on and so forth. And so that, and swing music and so on. And you'll have a lot more information about that project, both in this volume of They Drew As They Pleased, volume 2, and also in volume 3. And then when I went to the Animation Research Library about a month later, well, again, that's where we found the other half of the artwork for that same project completely by mistake because I was looking for a completely different file, and in that specific box there was that file of artwork by James Bodrero. So this is how sometimes it's really a lot of hard work, and you find the stuff because you're really working on it, and sometimes frankly it's pure luck, or luck that's helped with a lot of knowledge, but it's pure luck.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I couldn't even imagine it. Just browsing through some of this stuff, it just makes you light up, and I couldn't imagine being there firsthand and actually finding it all. Some of my personal favourite artwork from this volume, from the second volume, Kay Nielsen's work from Night on Bald Mountain. Incredible stuff. I counted there's 10 pages worth of material you've published, 20 pieces of art plus a bit of reference photographs and stuff from that. His work for The Ride of the Valkyries, for the Abandoned Fantasia segment, absolutely fantastic. Sylvia Holland's art from Fantasia, the Dance Little Sugar Plum Fairies and the Pastoral Symphony. Absolute favourite for me. Fantasia is one of my absolute favourites from the classic golden age, I suppose, of Disney animation, and seeing that artwork that I've never seen before, I was just absolutely incredible. I sat and I was looking at those pages, I think, for half an hour. Man, there's some fantastic stuff in there. David Hall's artwork, at Alice in Wonderland concept art. I mean, that's a very, very different style than we've ever seen anyone's concept art for Alice in Wonderland before. We're so used to seeing the Mary Blair art for Alice in Wonderland, and I think seeing that stuff is just really refreshing and just showing that different artists were working on these different projects, and they all had their different styles, and in the end they all came together and just sort of built this unique style for each project. And amongst there's also artwork from The Little Mermaid, when they were producing a version of The Little Mermaid in the 1940s, and even that, you don't hear about that that often, and it's just my mind's blown. The stuff in this volume especially is absolutely spectacular, and I think you've done a fantastic job, and it looks like you've put in a lot of hard work to find it all, and it's a credit to you, and thank you, I suppose.
You're very, very welcome.
You have found some amazing stuff, as you said, that hasn't been seen for some of the stuff 70 years, and being able to publish it, and for everyone to be able to see it instead of it being stuck in a closet for 70 years. I mean, this is where it belongs. This is where this artwork belongs. People got to see this and really appreciate the artists and the artwork, and your write-ups on the artists. Just everything. It's a fantastic book. I really, really loved it. I'm really looking forward to what's coming next in the series. Can you tell me a little bit about, just briefly, about the next volume? What's the title and what's it going to cover?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next volume, the subtitle is going to be The Hidden Art of the Hidden Art of Disney's Late Golden Age. And the subtitle is really the 1940s Part 2. What the volume really is about is it's really about the artists who worked in the character model department, that incredible department that was started by Joe Grant to, at the beginning, design the characters, but then later on really became a second type of story department. And those artists, that was the ivory tower of Disney, where if the title of the series is They Drew as They Pleased, well, this is really the place where they drew as they pleased. And they were the best of the best of the best. And what they drew, what they designed is absolutely mind-blowing. And John Canemaker had already dealt a little bit with the character model department, but I think this book is going to be the first really in-depth story of the character model department from start to finish, in all of the details, with full of illustrations, photographs, artwork, and again, 90% of it never ever seen in book form before. It's it really, really is a very exciting volume. And then volume 5, and it's a bigger volume than the previous ones. It's going to have 250 pages or close to 250 pages, which was a very interesting and tough negotiation with Chronicle Books, but they were kind enough to let me have my way on this. And the next volumes are going to be the regular size again after that. Volume 4 is going to be on the 1950s and 1960s. So the mid-century modern era. And that's going to be dealing with 5 artists who are going to be Lee Blair and Mary Blair, Tom Oreb, John Donne, and Walt Peregoy. It's going to be another feast for the eyes, very, very different from the previous volumes in terms of style. Really, really designy and modern and exciting. And then volume 5 is going to be focused on just 2 artists, only 2. It's going to be on the 1970s and the 1980s, and those 2 artists are 2 of my very, very favorite Disney artists of all time. One of them is Ken Anderson, and the other one is Mel Shaw. And I think that each one of them deserves a full book just about him. But because that's not doable, at least that book is going to be half on one and half on the other. And I think that's going to be really exciting. And then the last book in the series, I haven't defined yet exactly who the artists are going to be. I know that Joe Grant is going to be featured, and I know that Mike Giaimo and also Hans Baker are going to be featured. It's going to be a book mostly on the 1990s and maybe the early 2000s, and that's going to be really, really fun in itself. Also, probably hoping to include some Tim Burton artwork also in there for Black Cauldron and a few other things. But we'll see. It's a bit further down the line. That's 2020, so it's further away.
So we'll have quite a few years to enjoy these volumes. And I was collecting the archive series ones before yours. I was very disappointed to see them stop doing that, but this has absolutely just quenched my appetite for that. And I think in a great respect, these are actually better volumes than those archive series ones, because the artwork in these and the text and everything are just fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to collecting these bit by bit over the next so many years up until 2020, and I'm really excited about that. I'm also excited. I noticed you mentioned you're working on a book about interviews conducted by David Johnson about the making of Snow White, and that is my all-time favourite Walt Disney film. I mean, that's going to be a really special book as well. I think I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. And I have quite a few other projects that I'm working on at the moment, which I'm going to reveal in the next few weeks and months. But there's a lot more to come.
Fantastic. You're a very busy man, and I'm sure you've got a very busy day doing detective work and the like. So I'll let you go. And once again, thank you so much for taking, how long has it been now? Over half an hour. Oh, nearly an hour. Thank you so much for your generosity and all your time, and it's been absolutely wonderful. It's really nice to speak to you finally, and I'd really like to speak to you again in the future when you've got another volume of this or another book or something out. That'll be a lot of fun.
Thank you very, very much. That was really fun. Have a wonderful, wonderful night, and let's speak more by Facebook or email in the next few days.
Thank you very much. All right. Enjoy
Bye-bye.
your day. Bye. Well, thank you for sticking right through to the end of the interview. I hope you had as much fun listening to Didier as I did interviewing him. Once again, Didier's book. This is, of course, the first volume. This is the kind of thing you're going to get. If you're interested, if you don't have this first volume, this is pretty much the kind of thing to expect from the second volume, and in some cases the artwork in the second volume out trumps some of the stuff that Didier has found for this one. There's some absolutely beautiful stuff in there. Of course, this is the cover once again for the new volume, the Hidden Art of Disney's Musical Years, which is available on August 30th. Once again, available on Amazon and Book Depository or your local booksellers. I will put a couple of links in the description below just so it's easy for you to head over and pre-order or order if you'd like. So please support Didier and support this pardon me, support this wonderful project, and I myself am really looking forward to collecting these books right up until 2020. It's going to be a lot of fun. And at that, thank you all once again for watching the video. If you liked what you saw and you'd like to watch my future interview videos or my future review videos, I do book reviews, movie reviews, merchandise reviews, all that kind of stuff related to Disney, Pixar, Marvel and Star Wars, all the Disney brands and Disney parks of course. All the Disney brands. Please click subscribe or head over to the Facebook and click like, or do both, and keep up to date on all the happenings on my channel and check out my videos as they are uploaded. Once again, I said this is hopefully the very first in a long line of interview videos, and I have one in particular lined up over the next month or so, which I'm really trying to work out schedules at the moment, and hopefully we can get that video up as soon as we can, and that's going to be really special as well. I'm not going to say it at the moment, I don't want to jinx it, but that's going to be something really special, and I think you'll all enjoy that too. So please subscribe and give me a like, and help me on this journey to making this one of the largest Disney hubs around the world. I'd really like you to join me on this journey. So at that, thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys later, and I hope you have a magical day.